Welcome to Artificial Fictions. I post new scary stories that were written by artificial intelligence. I hope you enjoyed them. Jenna had always been curious about the abandoned factory on the edge of town. She had heard stories about strange things happening there, but she never believed them. One night, she decided to explore the factory for herself. As she stepped inside, she felt a chill run down her spine. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and she could hear strange noises coming from the shadows. Jenna tried to turn back, but it was too late. The door had closed behind her, and she was trapped. As she explored the factory, she saw that it was filled with strange machinery and twisted experiments. But the more she saw, the more she realized that something was watching her. Jenna turned around, and she saw a group of shadowy figures watching her from the shadows. They were humanoid in shape, but their faces were twisted and distorted, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Jenna tried to run, but the creatures pursued her relentlessly. She could hear their footsteps behind her, and she knew that they were getting closer. Finally, Jenna reached a dead end. She turned around to face the creatures, but they were gone. In their place stood a massive, grotesque monster. The monster towered over her, its jaws dripping with saliva. Jenna tried to fight, but it was no use. The monster was too strong. As it dragged her into the shadows, Jenna realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She had underestimated the danger of the abandoned factory, and now she was paying the price. Her fate was a warning to others to never go where they were not welcome, or they might never come back. It was the dead of night, and Emily was driving down a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. She was on her way home from a party and was feeling tired after a long night of drinking. As she drove, she began to feel a strange sensation in the pit of her stomach. It was as if something was watching her, following her every move. Emily tried to shake off the feeling, but as she looked in her rearview mirror, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. She screamed, but as she looked back, the eyes were gone. She thought it must have been her imagination, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. As Emily continued to drive, she heard strange noises coming from the trunk of her car. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way out. She pulled over and opened the trunk, but there was nothing there. She tried to calm herself down, but as she got back in the car, she heard a low growling sound coming from the back seat. Emily turned on the light, and she saw a grotesque monster sitting in her back seat. It had razor-sharp claws and teeth, and it looked hungry. Emily tried to run, but the monster grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back into the car. She screamed for help, but there was no one around to hear her. As the monster began to feed on her, Emily realized that she was never going to make it out alive. She had let her guard down, and now she was paying the ultimate price. In the end, Emily became just another victim of the strange creatures that lurked in the dark corners of the world. Her fate was a warning to others to always be on guard, even when they thought they were safe. Sarah was always fascinated by old abandoned houses. She loved exploring their dark corners, imagining the people who once lived there and the secrets that they might have hidden within their walls. One day, Sarah found an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. It was overgrown with weeds, and the windows were boarded up, but Sarah knew that she had to explore it. As she stepped inside, she was greeted by the musty smell of decay. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the furniture was covered in dust and cobwebs. But as Sarah explored the mansion, she began to notice strange things happening. Doors that were closed suddenly opened on their own, and she heard whispers coming from the shadows. Sarah tried to leave, but she found that she couldn't. The doors wouldn't budge, and the windows were too high to reach. As she sat in the dim light, she heard a creaking sound coming from the ceiling. She looked up to see a shadowy figure looming above her. The figure descended from the ceiling, revealing itself to be a grotesque monster with gnarled claws and razor-sharp teeth. Sarah screamed, but no one could hear her. She was trapped, with no hope of escape. But then, something strange happened. The monster suddenly disappeared, and Sarah was left alone in the mansion. She didn't know what had happened, but she knew that she had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. She decided to leave the mansion, and never return. As she stepped outside, Sarah looked back at the mansion. She saw that it was no longer the abandoned relic she had known, but a place of terror and darkness. Sarah knew that she had to leave, but she also knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for its next victim. She had narrowly escaped this time, but she didn't know if she would be so lucky again. There was a small town nestled in the forest, where strange things were said to happen. The locals whispered about a dark presence that lurked in the woods, waiting for unsuspecting travelers to cross its path. One day, a group of friends decided to hike through the forest, ignoring the warnings of the townspeople. They were young and adventurous, and they didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. As they walked deeper into the forest, they began to hear strange noises around them. They heard the rustling of leaves and the sound of twigs snapping underfoot. It was as if something was following them, just out of sight. The group tried to ignore it, but as they reached a clearing, they saw a figure in the distance. It was tall and dark, with glowing red eyes and a grotesque shape. The friends froze in terror as the figure began to move towards them. It let out a low growl, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The friends tried to run, but they soon realized that they were lost in the forest. They were trapped, with nowhere to go. As the figure approached them, it let out a deafening roar. The friends knew that they were in grave danger. Just then, they heard a sound of a car engine in the distance. They saw headlights coming towards them, and they knew that they had been saved. As the car approached, the friends saw that it was driven by an old man with a kind face. He told them to get in, and he drove them back to the town. The friends were shaken but relieved to have escaped. They thanked the old man for his help, but he looked at them gravely. "You were lucky to get out of there alive," he said. "That forest is cursed, and the creature you saw is not the only danger there." The friends shuddered, realizing that they had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. They decided never to venture into the forest again, but they knew that the dark presence would always be lurking, waiting for its next victim. It was a dark and stormy night, and Lucy was all alone in her house. She was used to being alone, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, and Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she sat in her living room, she heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking around in her bedroom. Lucy was terrified, but she knew she had to investigate. She slowly climbed the stairs, her heart racing with each step. As she reached the top of the stairs, she saw that her bedroom door was open. She could see a shadowy figure moving inside. Lucy summoned all her courage and stepped into the room. As she flicked on the light switch, she saw a figure standing in front of her, dressed in black robes. The figure turned to face her, revealing a terrifying face with deep-set eyes and a twisted smile. Lucy tried to run, but she found that she couldn't move. The figure began to speak, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "I have come to claim what is rightfully mine," it said. Lucy was paralyzed with fear as the figure stepped closer to her. She could feel its cold breath on her face, and she knew that she was in grave danger. Just then, the figure began to change. Its skin became translucent, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Lucy screamed as the figure transformed into a hideous demon, its wings spreading wide as it let out a blood-curdling shriek. Lucy was trapped, with nowhere to go. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst. But then, something strange happened. The demon suddenly disappeared, and Lucy was left alone in her bedroom. Lucy didn't know what had happened, but she knew that she had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. She decided to leave the house, and never return. As she stepped outside, Lucy looked back at her house. She saw that it was no longer the peaceful home she had known, but a place of terror and darkness. Lucy knew that she had to leave, but she also knew that the demon was still out there, waiting for its next victim. She had narrowly escaped this time, but she didn't know if she would be so lucky again. Lena had always been fascinated by old abandoned buildings, so when she heard about an old mansion on the outskirts of town, she couldn't resist the urge to explore it. As she stepped inside the mansion, she could feel the presence of something dark and foreboding. The air was heavy and thick, and the halls were lined with dusty paintings and antique furniture. As she walked deeper into the mansion, Lena began to hear strange noises. She heard whispers, footsteps, and even laughter. Despite her fear, Lena continued to explore. She was determined to find out what had happened in the mansion all those years ago. But when she reached the end of the hallway, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In front of her was a room with a door that was locked from the outside. Curiosity getting the best of her, Lena decided to try to open the door. As she pulled on the lock, she heard a low growling sound coming from inside. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Lena was face to face with a pack of snarling wolves. The wolves lunged at her, and Lena ran for her life. As she ran through the mansion, she saw that the halls were filled with other dangerous creatures. She saw ghosts, goblins, and even a giant spider. Lena tried to find a way out, but every door was locked. She was trapped, with nowhere to go. Just when she thought it was all over, Lena saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small window, and the light was coming from outside. With all the strength she had left, Lena ran towards the window. When she reached it, she saw that it was too high for her to reach. But then, something strange happened. The window started to grow larger, and the light became brighter. Lena realized that she was being lifted up towards the window. As she broke through the window, Lena found herself in a different world. The creatures were gone, and she was surrounded by a beautiful, peaceful landscape. Lena realized that she had been transported to another dimension, a place where the supernatural was not a source of fear, but a source of wonder and awe. But as Lena looked back at the mansion, she saw that it was no longer abandoned. It was teeming with creatures of all kinds, all of them waiting for their next victim. Lena knew that she had narrowly escaped, and she knew that she could never go back. She was lucky to have made it out alive, and to have discovered a world beyond her wildest dreams. But she also knew that the mansion was still there, waiting for its next victim. Jessica had always been fascinated by the supernatural, so when she heard about an old abandoned asylum in the nearby town, she couldn't resist the urge to explore it. As she stepped inside the building, she could feel the presence of something dark and foreboding. The air was cold and damp, and the halls were empty. As she walked deeper into the asylum, Jessica began to hear strange noises. She heard footsteps, whispers, and even laughter. Despite her fear, Jessica continued to explore. She was determined to find out what had happened in the asylum all those years ago. But when she reached the end of the hallway, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In front of her was a room with a door that was chained shut. Curiosity getting the best of her, Jessica decided to try to open the door. As she pulled on the chains, she heard a low growling sound coming from inside. Suddenly, the chains broke, and the door swung open. Inside, she saw a creature that was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was tall, with razor-sharp claws and teeth, and its eyes glowed red in the darkness. Jessica tried to run, but the creature was too fast. As she ran through the asylum, she saw that the halls were filled with other creatures, all of them hunting her down. Jessica tried to find a way out, but every door was locked. She was trapped, with nowhere to go. Just when she thought it was all over, Jessica saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small window, and the light was coming from outside. With all the strength she had left, Jessica ran towards the window. When she reached it, she saw that it was too high for her to reach. But then, something strange happened. The window started to grow larger, and the light became brighter. Jessica realized that she was being lifted up towards the window. As she broke through the window, Jessica found herself in a different world. The creatures were gone, and she was surrounded by a beautiful, peaceful landscape. Jessica realized that she had been transported to another dimension, a place where the supernatural was not a source of fear, but a source of wonder and awe. Jessica never forgot her experience in the asylum, and she knew that she had been changed forever. She was lucky to have made it out alive, and to have discovered a world beyond her wildest dreams. It was a dark and stormy night, and Maria was driving home from work. The rain was pouring down so hard that she could barely see the road in front of her. As she drove along the deserted highway, Maria heard a strange noise coming from her car. She pulled over to the side of the road and got out to take a look. As she opened the hood of the car, she saw that something was terribly wrong. The engine was smoking, and the belts were all torn. Feeling helpless, Maria turned around to head back to her car when she saw a figure standing in the distance. It was a man, but she couldn't see his face in the darkness. The man started walking towards her, slowly but steadily. As he got closer, Maria could see that he was wearing old, tattered clothes, and that his eyes were glowing in the dark. Maria tried to run back to her car, but she tripped and fell. As she hit the ground, the man was standing over her. She screamed for help, but there was no one around to hear her. The man grabbed her by the arm and dragged her into the woods. As they walked deeper into the woods, Maria could see that the man was not human. He had razor-sharp claws and teeth, and his skin was rotting and peeling off. Just when Maria thought it was all over, she saw a light in the distance. It was a small cabin, and the light was coming from inside. With all the strength she had left, Maria broke free from the creature's grasp and ran towards the cabin. When she reached the door, she banged on it with all her might. An old man opened the door, and Maria collapsed in his arms, sobbing with relief. The old man listened to her story, and then he told her the truth. The creature that had been chasing her was a cursed soul that had been wandering the woods for centuries, looking for its next victim. Maria never forgot that night, and she never ventured into the woods again. She was lucky to have made it out alive. Lena had always loved exploring abandoned places, so when she heard about an old, run-down hotel on the outskirts of town, she couldn't resist the urge to check it out. As soon as she stepped inside the lobby, Lena knew something was wrong. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. But it wasn't until she heard the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs that she truly felt her heart race. Ignoring her better judgment, Lena slowly made her way up the creaky staircase. The closer she got to the top, the louder the footsteps became. It was as if someone was walking towards her, step by step. When Lena finally reached the top of the stairs, she found herself in a dimly lit hallway. The only sound now was the faint whisper of the wind outside. As she walked down the hallway, she saw that each door had a number etched into it. And as she got closer to the end of the hallway, the numbers began to get higher and higher. But when she reached the end of the hallway, Lena saw something that made her blood run cold. The last door had a number 666 etched into it. Despite her fear, Lena couldn't resist the urge to open the door. What she found inside was something straight out of a nightmare. In the center of the room was a large, black mirror. Lena could see her reflection in it, but it wasn't her reflection that made her scream. In the reflection, Lena saw the shadowy figure of a man standing behind her. She turned around to see if anyone was there, but the room was empty. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and Lena was plunged into complete darkness. She tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. As she stood there, alone in the darkness, Lena heard a low, menacing laughter. And then, she heard the sound of footsteps coming closer and closer. With a sudden burst of courage, Lena broke through the door and ran out of the hotel. She never looked back, too afraid of what she might see if she did. Only later did she find out that the hotel had been built on top of an ancient burial ground, and that the spirits of the dead had been haunting it for centuries. Lena was lucky to have made it out alive. As soon as Jane stepped inside the old, abandoned house, she knew something was off. The air was heavy and damp, and the silence was suffocating. Despite the bright sunlight outside, the inside of the house was dark and gloomy. As she walked through the dusty hallway, she heard a faint creaking noise. At first, she thought it was just the old house settling, but the sound continued to grow louder and more persistent. It was as if someone was following her, step by step. Jane quickened her pace, but the sound only got louder. She turned around to see if anyone was behind her, but the hallway was empty. She shuddered, feeling a cold chill run down her spine. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath her feet gave way, and Jane fell through a hole in the floor. She landed hard on the ground, and when she looked up, she saw that she was in a dark, damp cellar. The only light came from a small window high up on the wall, but it was enough to see the shadowy figures moving around her. She could hear their whispers, their sinister laughter, and their ragged breathing. Jane tried to scramble to her feet, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to escape the horrors that lurked in the darkness. As the figures drew closer, Jane could see that they were not human. They were twisted, distorted creatures with glowing eyes and sharp, jagged teeth. They circled around her, their claws reaching out to grab her. Just as Jane thought all hope was lost, she heard a voice. It was her friend's voice, calling out to her from above. With a sudden burst of energy, Jane managed to break free from the creature's grasp and climb up to the surface. As soon as she emerged from the cellar, Jane saw her friend standing there, holding a flashlight. Together, they ran out of the house, never looking back. Only when they were far away from the haunted house did Jane realize that her friend had been dead for years, and that she had been all alone in the house. The creatures in the cellar had been the spirits of those who had died there, and they had been waiting for her to join them.